what is the Center of Foreign Feminist Policy all about?
So the center that I co-founded, the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy, it's pretty much, I guess, about smashing patriarchy within foreign and security policy within diplomacy. That means that kind of in a first step, we acknowledge that even in diplomacy and foreign policy, like those old structures that have been built over decades and centuries, they are very patriarchal, meaning that the needs and the priorities and the security needs of certain groups of people, precisely those who are still in power, they are over prioritized. So this is what most people care about, and this is how they cater then foreign and security policy decisions. And with the center, we are like, no, guys, that's not been working very well over the past centuries, and we need to change. We need to get the perspectives of all groups of people and the security needs of all groups of people, especially also political minorities, of which women is one group. We need to get them into foreign and security policy decisions.
I was wondering, because there are many levels to kind of increase diversity, but why is it so relevant in the context of foreign policy?
So getting feminist perspectives into all areas of society is absolutely necessary, because unless we do so, and unless we consider everybody's needs and lived experiences as relevant, all policymaking will be incomplete, and all policymaking will only reinforce existing inequalities and discrimination that we have in this world. And foreign and security policy, first of all, for me, it's like a passion project. That's what I studied. That's where I worked in Colombia and Myanmar and New York. And also it's on the one hand, it's so abstract, and many people think it has nothing to do with the daily lives, but that's where the big decisions are being made. That's where the big decisions also being made about like declaring Corona like an international emergency, and like how do we collaborate internationally. So we need to get like feminist thinking, a thinking that really takes care of all groups of society and their needs to get into this like really elite and kind of abstract field as well.
And what would you say, what is a misconception that people have about diplomacy?
I guess it's this idea that being diplomatic means to not speak your mind. It means just to stand there and like have a little sparkling wine and like do some shoulder patting with each other. And where, for example, when we're a big fan of Sweden's foreign policy, because they a couple of years ago introduced a feminist foreign policy. And when the then foreign minister did so, Margot Wallström, she was accused of mixing up activism with diplomacy, because people think like diplomacy is like always being kind and nice and like, yeah, not speaking your mind. But I think that's a misconception. If we're not daring like to come up with new ideas and also be kind of in a way activist, this field won't develop, and we will be stuck with those very ideas of a couple of hundred years ago when the first kind of resident ambassadors and the field of diplomacy was created.
And what would you say, how can we in general encourage more people to engage in politics?
I guess what's necessary is to give people a sense or the idea that their ideas and voice matters. But if we're in Germany, we're stuck with a political sphere or area with many groups, be it like people, non-white people, or people with a different religion, or women, where they look at politics and they're like, well, but that has nothing to do with me. Like those people who make decisions, they don't look like me, and I really don't benefit. Like, but the things that I really need, they're not considering. So there's this, I guess, frustration, because especially if you're one of this, like part of one of these groups that historically have not been in power in, be it like domestic policy or foreign policy, it is frustrating. Like, first of all, kind of imagining yourself being in that position, and then fight yourself in, because there's so many obstacles. And unless we manage to get rid of those obstacles and give everyone like a fair chance of participating in this policy making, it will be frustrating and like will be put off many more people.
And in that respect, what do you consider the most promising lever to get more women also into politics and foreign politics?
Mm. I guess once you start changing structures in a way that, for example, if you're a woman and you're now looking at the Foreign Office in Germany, at the Auswärtiges Amt, or diplomacy more general, you know that your chances of becoming an ambassador at some point, they're so low. We only have like in the richest 50 countries in the world, only 16% of ambassadors are women. So if you're like looking at this from the outside, you're like, okay, if I go in there now, my chances of being successful and influential, they're by far not as high if I was a man, because men still get promoted only because they're men. So unless we really make an effort and incentives to rebuild and rethink those structures, that in a way that everyone who considers going into this field has a sense that they can have an impact and their voice will be heard and their policy ideas matter, it will be tough. So change the system and the structures first, and then automatically people will follow, because they will not have to face those obstacles and also of nastiness. Yeah.
So in that sense, what would be a solution or an incentive? You have been spoken about incentives.
Mm.
Any ideas of?
Yeah. So when it comes to foreign policy, there are a couple of countries that we can look up to. So that is, for example, Sweden. Sweden in 2014 introduced a feminist foreign policy, and Canada 3 years later they introduced a feminist international development policy, and France and Mexico only earlier this year they followed as well. So they are really walking the talk. So they are looking at the different levels and look at, okay, so what who are the people who are making decisions, and they're introducing be it quotas, be it like different conditions for the system when diplomats have to like live in different countries around the world. And so they're implementing like precise policies and like internal policies, so that the likelihood of people becoming successful and gaining access to powerful positions will be more fairly distributed.
What woman is a role model to you, and why?
There's so many. I guess I'm very, very blessed that I consider, or that I look up to so many women in my life. Some of them who I know personally, others who I know through media and the news, like many of us do. So very recently, for example, I read the autobiography of Samantha Power. Samantha Power used to be the US ambassador to the United Nations. I find her extremely inspiring, and like for someone like me, working in the field, like but in a slightly different way, but also kind of being the activist in like diplomatic area, that is huge for me, and that really inspires me. But I don't know her personally, unfortunately. But then there's also someone who has greatly impacted my life is Cilla Elworthy. Cilla I met when I, a couple of years ago, studied in the UK. And Cilla, she's a 3 times Nobel Peace Prize nominee and founded several organizations, mainly on nuclear disarmament and localized peace building. And having someone like her in my life, who's now a very close friend of mine, who I've been talking to over the years, and I mean, it's the biggest gift, and I would not be doing what I'm doing now had it not been for Cilla and the inspiration that I get from like being with her.
And what is one thing that people might don't know about your career?
That it's been like, a very long time, there has not been any plan or anything. I guess looking back now, I'm lucky that for the most part, it seems like that there was some plan. So first I studied like psychology, and then realizing that something is missing, for my master's I changed to politics, and then did something on political psychology in between, and it all makes sense now. But like really, it was, I studied psychology and I was still like, I really don't know what I want to study, so I tried something new. And it was only in my early 20s, mid 20s, maybe, when I got a better idea of what I want to be doing. But also with the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy that I co-founded, it wasn't long, like it wasn't something that I had been ruminating about for many years. No, I studied politics, and I worked in Colombia. I worked for the UN, and then I got frustrated again with the structures in the system. And then I was like, okay, maybe do something by myself. Like, yeah, it has never been as planned as it, I guess, looks like when looking back.
And what would you say is the biggest surprise, or has been the biggest surprise in your career so far?
I guess that I did end up starting something on my own. And that I guess that I started something on my own and in the field of diplomacy.
And being very kind of present now, what would you say did the Corona crisis bring to your attention again?
Again, that so many perspectives are missing. So many perspectives. If you look at like the talk shows, if you look at who's writing, excuse me, who's producing the big studies currently that inform the decisions by our government. If you look at the ministries who they are headed by, it's again a very small a group of people that do have a certain set of own lived experiences and priorities, and they're important, but that can't be all. There's so many perspectives again missing. Like the Corona crisis is such a feminist issue, like the burden of care. Like, first of all, it's mainly women who are at the front lines, like in the supermarkets and in the health sector. The health sector is 70% women. It's them doing the underpaid work who are on the front line. It's also then them who are doing the unpaid care work when the children are now at home. It's like the increased domestic violence that women are affected by again. It's the lack of those perspectives in decision-making bodies. It is such a feminist issue, but we're not tackling it as such. And unless you tackle a crisis from a intersection of feminist perspectives and really make an effort to undo wrongs of the past, they will only be perpetuated, they will only be reinforced. And we're at a point now where we need to make sure that those different, progressive, new ideas, they make it into the policy making, if we want this crisis to also be kind of a chance for a new start in a way, so that society after the crisis looks a lot fairer than it has been for so many centuries for so many people.
Could you describe yourself in 3 words only?
3 words? Mm-hmm. I guess it would be, determined, resilient, I guess, and empathetic, maybe. Yeah, I'll go for these 3.
And in 1 hashtag only, what would it be?
1 hashtag. People, for many years, they kept calling me, in a way, like troublemaker. And in the beginning, I didn't like it because I thought, I'm not like making any troubles. I'm just asking questions. But over time, I'm like, okay, if like you consider trying to work for a better, fairer society as troublemaking, then I'm proudly going to be a troublemaker.
Speaking maybe of troublemaking, what act of diplomacy, let's say the last 5 years or maybe even longer ago, did you find most impressive, and why?
There are very many, and like when you ask these questions, like the big agreements and treaties on disarmament, especially nuclear disarmament, and like treaties like the nuclear ban treaty, championed by a organization that we work a lot with, that's the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. Like, these things immediately come into my mind, but like that was a cheeky trick because I already mentioned them. I want to add something else. I think there's this agenda that was agreed on 20 precisely exactly 20 years ago this year in the United Nations Security Council, and it's the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. Like that's a resolution, and by now we have like 10 of those like follow-up resolutions, and this resolution from 2000 as well. And that is remarkable because it was the first time in history that in the United Nations Security Council, which is the body which is mandated with maintaining international peace and security, recognized that it's not only men, and it's also women. It's like everyone's society that needs to be considered when it comes to promoting peace and peace building, and that certain groups of society, women or LGBTQI people, they have different needs and lived experiences, and we need to consider them. So yeah, it's the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, which was kind of started in a way 20 years ago in United Nations Security Council.
And what kind of developments in terms of gender equality over the past years did you feel most excited about?
The ever-growing and ever more outspoken feminist grassroots movement. When I look back, I mean, there has been feminist activism for so many years, like more than hundreds of years, even in diplomacy, which many people don't know about. But like, if I look back when I grew up in the early 90s, there was not like feminism, and feminists had such a very different connotation back then, and it was like, and feminist women, feminist leaders were hardly present in our news coverage or on television, and that has changed. And feminist books and feminist literature and feminist series on Netflix, and you find feminist activism and feminist thoughts everywhere now, and it's mainly driven by feminist grassroots civil society organizations around the world who are unapologetic, and they're not having it anymore. They're like what if you are trying like to put me down, I'm going to become even stronger.
And what would you love to see happen in international politics?
So many things. I'd love it, like on a more abstract level. I love if we start to like on a large scale, and not only in this diplomatic or foreign policy bubble that I'm in, but on a large scale, really consider human security as the priority of all international policy making. Because when we still talk about security policy in international politics, people immediately think of state security. What can we do to keep borders and the nation secure? But I wish and I hope that the concept of human security, what can we do to keep humans secure, that they gains more like international and wide prominence. Because also now with the Corona crisis, you know, like many feminists in international politics, they ask, how can it be that, for example, a country like the US is awash with weapons, but does not have enough facial masks and surgical kits for their frontline staff? And if we focus on human security, that means we focus on that people have good housing and education and healthcare, instead of giving everyone a gun and like increasing the military budget. If we manage that, like to really focus on human security in international politics, that would be huge.
And what does sustainability mean to you?
Sustainability. So if you consider sustainability in a sense in the climate understanding, like building a world that manages like to use the resources that are given by nature in a sustainable way, that we're not destroying the environment and the whole system that we live in. Sustainability and climate is strongly linked, and it's a core part of feminist foreign policy and feminism in foreign and security policy. Because if we're trying, first of all, climate change is like a huge feminist issue. One brief example is that fairly easy, like those affected most by climate crisis are poor people, and the majority of poor people are women. So that is only like one example why it's a feminist issue. And we can only, like feminists, aim at building a peaceful and sustainable future. And that can only work if we are in complete alignment with the resources that we're given, and we're not exploiting. And this exploitation of natural resources in our environment, that comes from a very deep capitalistic approach, where we think we can all the time live above the what is available. And the feminist thinking, the tradition of feminist thinking at its core is also one which is very critical of capitalism. So this is where it all comes together, like focus on the sustainability and the respect towards the natural resources, and rethink how we've been acting like in this capitalistic way.
And what would you say, how can we encourage more people to kind of, have that mindset and live up to sustainability?
If we, I mean, we've been, like, society has been very strong on sharing information, and that doesn't always do the job, but sometimes it helps to see what happens if we don't care, if we don't act in a way that we need to, in order to preserve this beauty just out of this like window. And I hope that the current crisis, which I guess in a way is like nature and the environment like showing us the middle finger, being like, you guys, I've given you like decades or even more to really get your shit together and finally treat me in a way that I'll survive, and you failed. So I'm gonna show you now my power, and gonna get all those airplanes from the sky, and like reduce the traffic, and like do all the things that you haven't managed. And I hope that what is happening now can be seen by many as like a personally felt incidents that helps us to rethink.
And what is the best advice that you've ever received in your career? Or let's say life.
Oh, that's a big one. There are many, but okay, let's stick to career. To first of all, always ask questions and never be satisfied with answers that you're given. Like, stay critical and never stop rethinking the very assumptions so many people assume are just the right way. But like once we start rethinking everything, like also, for example, history, like what is history? Some people just take history for face value, right? But if you start thinking like, but wait, who wrote history and who made the decision that this is important and we're excluding this, and what impact does it then have on the narrative we're telling ourselves as a society, and what consequence does it have for what decisions we take for the future? Like if you start rethinking the various assumptions in like every area you're like working in, that is powerful. And that was an advice that I was given, I guess, early on, I don't know. And that has helped me a lot.
And what is the advice that you would give your future self then?
Never, like, no matter how I guess successful or impactful or how much part of a certain influential group of society you become, never stop being outspoken, and never get accustomed to injustice, and always speak your mind, and don't get corrupted.
What is inspiring to you right now?
All those, like my center, personally, we are looking a lot at those other voices in the Corona crisis who are bringing forward powerful and like very different solutions, and there are many out there, and I find those people so inspiring. Like they inspire me every day. Like I read their things, I'm like, oh my god, yes, and I need to now talk to the foreign ministry and the health ministry and like tell them. And yeah, that is very inspiring to me.
And if you wouldn't be running the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy here in Germany, what would you be doing instead?
I've never thought about this. I guess I would be. I lived abroad for a couple of years. I guess I would not be living in Berlin because the center, or like starting the organization, brought me back here to Berlin. So I would not be in Berlin, and I would likely be working in some grassroots feminist organization, maybe still in Myanmar, where I lived before I came back to Berlin, or I don't know, yeah, some feminist grassroots organization somewhere, but not in Berlin. Yeah.
That's impressive. Thank you so much, Kristina, for taking time.
Thank you.